Welcome to week number 4 in our series of professional development workshops for the 2020 Leadership Alliance Summer Programming. I'm Dr. Will Whittles. I'm the manager for undergraduate and graduate programs here at the Leadership Alliance. I will be the moderator for today's event. This event is a component of the Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Program. Leadership Alliance partners created this initiative to ensure continuity of skill building, networking, and exposure to graduate programs for students from across the country. Paired with our Monday evening Conversations with the Doctoral Scholar series, we hope to provide you with a platform for discussion of critical issues, networking with each other and our wonderful doctoral scholars, as well as for learning approaches and skills for navigating your research careers. This series would not be possible without the work of my colleagues at Brown University, Chaminade University in Honolulu, Weill Cornell Medical College, and Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. To those colleagues, thank you for your efforts in creating this program. Today, we will be talking about applying to graduate school in the physical sciences. In addition to sharing, and as well as engineering, in addition to sharing general guidance from our panelists, we look forward to responding to as many of your questions as possible. If we are unable to get to your question during the panel, please reach out to a member of our team so that we can ensure that it does get answered. For today's event, we are joined by two wonderful scholars from the Leadership Alliance family. I'm going to introduce them alphabetically. Dr. Don Brunson is the Assistant Dean of the Vanderbilt University Graduate School and Director of the Graduate School's Enhancing Diversity in Graduate Education Program, or VU-EDGE. He is responsible for leading recruitment and retention efforts for underrepresented minority PhD students in all fields and women PhD students majoring in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. He also serves as Vanderbilt's institutional coordinator and a summer program coordinator for the Leadership Alliance. His other Vanderbilt responsibilities include advising the organization of Black graduate and professional students and representing Vanderbilt in the following consortia: the Leadership Alliance, the National Name Exchange, the National GEM Consortium, and the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers. Dr. Brunson is a native of Baltimore, Maryland. He received MARC undergraduate and graduate fellowships while earning a BS in chemistry from Morgan State University and a PhD in toxicology from MIT. After completing a 2-year postdoctoral appointment in the Department of Pharmacology and Molecular Sciences at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, he altered his career path from scientific research to university administration. He has served as Assistant Director of the MIT Office of Undergraduate Admissions, Special Assistant in the Office of the President of Morgan State University, and Director of Morgan State University's Honors Program. At Morgan, he served on numerous institutional committees and represented the university on various statewide boards and committees, all charged with improving access to and the quality of undergraduate education in Maryland, until his appointment at Vanderbilt in 2009. We are also joined by Dr. Michelle D. Neron. Michelle D. Neron is a Senior Associate Dean for Graduate Student Development and Diversity. Reporting to the Dean of the Graduate School, she provides the strategic vision and leadership to build and maintain an equitable and inclusive campus community where graduate students from diverse backgrounds and experiences are supported in their intellectual, social, and professional pursuits. She coordinates campus-wide admissions initiatives, directs the Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship, or SURF program, and the Emerging Scholars Initiative Post-Baccalaureate Research Education Program, ESI Prep. Additionally, in her capacity as the Yale Institutional Representative for various national consortia, she works to identify aspiring scholars who may contribute to the development of a more diverse faculty. Dr. Neron earned her BS and MS degrees in aerospace engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Brooklyn Polytechnic University, respectively. After completing her master's degree, she devoted approximately 10 years to both the aerospace and automotive industries, beginning as a research engineer and ultimately becoming a general manager. She returned to academia and earned a PhD in mechanical engineering at Stony Brook University with a specialty in fluid mechanics. She remained at Stony Brook University as a Turner postdoctoral fellow studying turbulence modeling before being offered an assistant professorship in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. She also simultaneously served as the Director of Recruitment and Diversification for the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences. She joined the Yale community in 2008. Welcome to you both. Students, please start sending questions for us. I'm going to ask our distinguished panelists to lead off by sharing the best piece of advice that they have for you, and we'll start again alphabetically with Dr. Brunson.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. The most important advice I would give you is to spend time, dedicate time, and then spend time selecting a department, a program, a faculty member that is best suited for your research interests. Too often, students can get wrapped up in the name of an institution. More important than the name of the institution is the person with whom you will work, but also the research focuses of that person's lab as well as the department. Because in your research dissertation, you will have a committee, and that committee will consist of experts who can help you along with that research dissertation project. So set aside the time to do the research that is needed to make sure that your efforts will be properly focused when it comes time to apply into graduate school.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you joining us this afternoon. And my piece of advice is in line with what Dr. Brunson suggested in terms of doing the research. Once you do the research, you want to make sure that you take time to put together a very thoughtful and compelling application. And you also want to reach out to individuals in roles similar to mine and Dr. Brunson and ask questions, okay? Because, you know, certainly you're going to, in most cases, potentially reach out to prospective faculty. But before you do ask them questions, you want to run some of them by individuals like us, and we can help to fine tune. Because keep in mind, the faculty that you have interest in will be receiving questions from many students, and you want to make sure that your key questions get answered. So don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to reach out to individuals like us, and we can provide guidance throughout your journey.
Ask questions. We haven't gotten any in the chat yet. So I'll field one. What should students, when they're getting to know the faculty at a potential school, what should they look for in mentors there? Mm-hmm.
So I can start with that. So you really want to get a sense of, just like you have to be a good fit for a prospective faculty member, they have to be a good fit for you. So, you know, look for people who have ideas and can kind of complement your ideas for the type of research that you're interested in. Look for people who you think will be supportive as you go through this process. That's why asking questions early on, after you've done the research, is important, okay? That way you get a feel for who they are, they get a feel for who you are. It's not a guarantee that you'll get into the program, but it certainly helps to make the process move smoother.
I would add to that two things that you should, well, actually one thing you should make sure is that you really know yourself. And what I mean by that is know that you are a person who needs more personal attention, then it might not be in your best interest to choose someone who has a national or international reputation, who may be gone a lot. That person might still be a good mentor, but that one-on-one, that direct time that is a crucial part of your scholarly development might not be available to you. So you should definitely do the research on who that person is, but also know yourself. Also understand their style. It could be that some folks are more hands-on, some mentors are more hands-on, and some are more, or will allow you to be more independent. So whatever your style of learning is, make sure that it aligns well with your advisor's style of mentoring.
And one way to do that is to reach out to students in a particular department and program to get feedback from them, because they're the ones who've actually engaged with the faculty that at some point you may or may not be working with.
And one of the things that you'll find is typically graduate students can be very honest about faculty in their departments.
Would you also recommend reaching out to other groups on campus, the Society of Engineers, for example, to find out about campus culture?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. A lot of campuses have, so at Yale, for example, we have a We Say Women in Science. And there's also Women in Science and Engineering component. They're also good, because most of these organizations are student run. And so they have a good feel for, the track record, the style of how the faculty teach, how they engage with students. So they're another potential source. You could also reach out to, most institutions have a grad student assembly or something comparable. They could be another source. And any of even just other student organizations. We have several cultural centers. You might reach out to some of the cultural centers to get a sense of, a student's perspective on the campus and the culture at large, but also many of them might know many of the faculty as well.
Yeah, it's important to understand the culture. However, unlike with your undergraduate experience, your graduate experience will be quite narrow, meaning you probably won't know the campus as well. If, for example, you're a student in engineering, you will probably spend a lot of time, most of your time, in an engineering complex or building, et cetera. So the fact that you don't know your way around campus the way you do as an undergrad is going to be quite expected. But reaching out to student organizations definitely can be important, particularly graduate student organizations, because that's what your life is going to be part of. I would say almost every institution has some form of graduate student council. They might have a different name at each institution. They will also, because you all are in STEM disciplines, also have typically multiple organizations either within the school, within the department, within the university that will concentrate on academic and professional development in STEM disciplines. So definitely reach out.
And what would be the best way to reach out to graduate students at prospective institutions?
You can certainly contact individuals like us, and we can put you in contact with students. Oftentimes, graduate students work in our offices across divisions, and so we can we can connect with the department directly. You can also reach out to the department directly. I would suggest not necessarily reaching out initially to faculty to be connected with students, but you might reach out to a department registrar. That's another source, and just let them know that you have an interest in speaking to some students. Can they make some recommendations?
Yeah, one of the things that you'll find is that the different schools, the different universities, the schools within the university, as well as the departments and or programs have a different setup. So there could be a person like a director of graduate studies, some kind of administrative officer, some kind of student officer. So you should definitely look into the infrastructure of the department and figure out what person you should contact in order to put you in contact with resources.
Dr. Brunson, you mentioned earlier that you should know what kind of advising style you're looking for. How do you know what kind of advising style works for you if you have very minimal research experience?
If you have very little research experience, well, I would say look how you function with your friends and with the faculty members at your current institution. Are you one who finds yourself visiting faculty members often to talk about your research, to talk about your thoughts? Do you find yourself consulting your friends, other people you consider mentors? If that is something that you've recognized that you do, then you know that you're probably someone who enjoys academic growth through those kinds of interactions. If you find yourself as soon as something comes up new to you, you find yourself running to resources, and then finally later on interacting with folks, then you know you are the opposite. Or you could be somewhere in the middle. So I would say just do an evaluation of how you like and prefer to work now, and that'll give you some idea of how you work.
Only thing I would add to that is, you know, some faculty have large labs where you might be in a lab with maybe 20 other graduate students, maybe a couple of undergrads, postdocs, and some technicians. But then other labs might have 2 or 3 grad students, right? So think about if you want to be in that large setting or a small setting, that could be something else. The other thing is, don't feel that you're locked into a particular advisor. And it works differently for different schools. Some schools, you may be able to, once you're on campus, get a sense of who the faculty are. There might be a lab rotation for some of the sciences that happens. But if in your first year you end up with a faculty member and it's just not working, don't hesitate to switch advisors. The sooner you do it, the better. Because if you wait until your 3rd, 4th year, then it becomes more complicated. So, you know, sometimes for some of you, it may be once you get to the campus, if you have a designated faculty advisor, getting a sense of how it actually works in real time. But again, if it's not working, don't hesitate. Faculty, it happens all the time. It's not unusual for students to change labs, change faculty advisors.
Do you think there is a benefit to taking some time off after undergraduate before going to graduate school?
So I can answer that from experience. I did not go right to doing the PhD. I did do the bachelor's and master's back to back, but then there was some space between the PhD. I think it's really a personal preference. I think when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking about doing a PhD at the time. And so doing the master's, I knew at a minimum I wanted the master's and then go into industry, which is what I did. But then after being in industry, you know, things lined up and I ended up going back into the academy to do the PhD. But it's really an individual decision. I don't have any regrets. I think what I did in industry certainly helped me to think about what I wanted to do for a PhD. If you don't have a clue as to what you want to do for a PhD program, it might be beneficial to take some time off, or you may consider doing a master's program. Most institutions, you can do what they call a terminal master's. You can come in just doing a master's, but oftentimes you have to pay for those. If you come into a PhD program, most PhDs are paid for. So think, and the time is also different. It takes longer, typically about 5 years to do the PhD. Masters will take maybe 1 to 2 years. So it's really an individual choice.
I agree, it's an individual choice, and I went directly from bachelor's to PhD. It's a personal choice, and as Dr. Neron said, if you decide that it's in your best interest to do a master's degree, you have to take into consideration that most master's degrees, even in STEM, are either not funded or only partially funded. That is, maybe only tuition, sometimes half tuition. But that shouldn't be the guiding thought of whether you have to pay or not, because it is, even though it's expensive, it's an investment in your career. And the worst thing that you can do is to perhaps torture yourself by, going into a PhD program if you're not ready, or if you're not ready to make that commitment and get there, and then have to deal with oh, I've got to leave. And then sometimes students put undue pressure and undue stress on themselves. Oh, I'm a failure, I'm a quitter, I'm et cetera. But that's not the case. But whatever it is, take time to think about what it is that you want to do, why it is that you want to do it, and make the commitment, regardless of that's going directly into the program or going into even, sometimes they have bridge programs, other kinds of post-baccalaureate opportunities, or master's degree programs. All of those can help you decide whether you want to continue to a PhD.
Once a student has made that decision and they're putting their application together, what are some important aspects to include in the personal statement? How much detail for those different aspects?
So most personal statements are about 1,000 words, which really isn't a lot of space. And you certainly want to address the question that's being asked, but at the PhD level, what we're trying to see between the lines are your research interests, your research experience, and how they tie into what's being done in the department. If you can convey that, that will set your personal statement apart from others. So it's really kind of conveying why you have an interest in doing what you plan to do and how it actually ties into what the department's doing.
And the other thing to consider too is, as Dr. Neron said, read the application, because there could be three things that you're being asked for: a research statement, a personal statement, and a statement of purpose. And often the statement of purpose and personal statement are used interchangeably only if there's only one essay that they have. Some schools might require 2 essays where they might say a personal statement and a research statement. But what we're talking about is that we're using statement of purpose and personal statement. It's exactly as Dr. Neron said, but when you write that, make sure that the overarching message is why you will be a productive scholar in that program. And what it is, actually most of it is what Dr. Neron said. They also want to know, you can also answer questions, but not too personally, how you got interested in research and why research is something that you want to do, and also your plans after you earn the degree. They're not set in stone, but programs and departments want to know that you've thought about that.
Also, I've heard that if you're in marine biology, you may be asked to submit a statement of purpose.
Say that again?
A statement of purpose, sorry. I'm picking my moderators. Sorry, I wanted to make a joke. I apologize. Continuing on the question of research interests, how do you suggest that we find our own specific area or research questions? And is this something that applicants need to have set in stone before they apply?
So you definitely, we don't expect you to come in with your thesis. That's what you spend the 5 years doing. But we do expect you to have some idea as to what you want to do. And one way, and it's in line with what we've been saying, to get a sense of that and to be able to articulate that is to do your research, right? Look at what the faculty are doing. Oftentimes, don't don't read what the department, like the department description, because oftentimes that's not going to give you a true sense of what the faculty are actually doing. Take time to look at the faculty's CVs, see what research they're doing, see what research is piquing your interest. Think about if you've been engaged in any summer research internships or research projects. You know, what's motivating you, okay? So when you write the personal statement, okay, then based on that information, that's gonna help you to determine what you want to do and how it ties into that department or program. That's why it's so important to investigate individual schools. The statement of purpose or the personal statement, once you have one, okay, it's easier to write several. Okay, but you have to pay attention to the details. So oftentimes a nice way to wrap up the personal statement is to talk about maybe 3 faculty who you're interested in, and maybe 1 or 2 lines about their research, because then it shows that you've done your research, that you're truly vested in putting together a meaningful application for that institution. But you have to do that for each institution that you apply to. So make sure that last paragraph changes for each individual application.
I hate to seem like a bobblehead doll, but I cannot. Dr. Nero and I have been doing these things together for years. You don't need to know how many. It's so important that you not do what I call name dropping, saying, and the research of Dr. Whittles, Dr. Neron, and Dr. Brunson, no. Make a statement about that research, like Dr. Whittle's research in feline psychology, blah, blah, blah. You would say, it interests me because you want them to know that you have spent time with that research. The more information that you can provide, the better and more secure that the admissions committee faculty members can have, knowing that the decision to give you an admissions offer is indeed a correct one. But you absolutely positively have to do that research, and you have to let them know that you have.
Regarding the matching of interests, is it essential to find a faculty member or multiple faculty members with similar research interests?
I would say that it helps to find multiple faculty. And again, there are some faculty who may be taking sabbaticals. There could be faculty who may be retiring, or for whatever reason, they may not be taking PhD students on. And so if your personal statement is tied to one faculty member, you may be an amazing candidate for the program, but then when it comes time around to select students to extend offers to, they may say, you know, student XYZ would have been a good candidate if this faculty member that they keep, this only faculty member that they're emphasizing, that this is the one person they want to work with, were here, this person might be a good fit. So it's always good to have several faculty who you could potentially work with. And again, you're not really locked into them. Even if you name 3 faculty, for example, in the personal statement, you're not locked into those 3 faculty. You're just letting them know that you're kind of getting a sense of who's doing what in the department. Again, it comes right back around to doing your research. Get a feel for what's being done in that department or program, and then who's actually doing the work.
Yeah, on the flip side, one of the strengths that you have being in a STEM discipline is that your research can often, or your research interests can often overlap with other faculty members. But the fact that you have at least identified at least 3, I shouldn't say that you have identified 3, shouldn't be more than 4 ever. Right. Because at that point you can seem unfocused. 1 is a no-no, 2's kind of questionable, 3 is ideal. That you have found 3 faculty members whose research interests align with yours is a good thing, because again, you don't know who's going to be taking students, who's going to be away, who's going on sabbatical, who might be planning to leave the institution. So,
what is the best way for students to make that contact for potential advisors before applying?
That's going to vary. Oh, do you want to? Okay.
Yeah. So, so I'm going to start with it. That's going to vary, but because you can do these things through email, it might happen through a network, through a conference. But if you choose email, which is often the most popular, keep in mind that often faculty members get a lot of email, a lot of business, academic email, etc. So if you're going to send them an email, you should keep it 5 sentences or less. Number 1. Number 2, skip the pleasantries. Dear Dr. Neron, I hope you're well. Well, if she isn't, she's not going to tell you. She doesn't know you. Skip the pleasantries. Introduce yourself, tell what your interest is, and again, on the research part, hopefully you had a chance to read at least a couple of their papers. You can really get their attention by asking a compelling question about the research. Now, it doesn't have to be a question that will make you a Nobel laureate, but if a faculty member knows that you're asking this question, then you're more likely to get an answer. It doesn't guarantee you. So keep in mind this, keep it short, 5 sentences or less, no pleasantry, definitely no humor. Introduce yourself, where you're from, what you want to do, and let them know that you're interested in pursuing research in that department, and ask a question regarding the research. Again, getting back to Dr. Whittles, it could be, Dr. Whittles, I've read your paper in the Journal of Feline Psychology, and in that paper you discussed how cats can react to certain kinds of stressors. Do you think that this would have been different if the cats were in environment X, Y, or Z? That's just an example, but I turn it over to Dr. Neron.
Sure. The only thing I would add is that you probably do not want to call faculty. I would not recommend a cold call. And there are also some institutions that don't even really like you to write, to email faculty. So get a sense, and a way to get a sense of what the protocols are at a given institution would be to, again, reach out to individuals like Dr. Brunson and myself. I typically, actually, I always recommend that students reach out to faculty, but again, with a very brief, concise email. Don't ask questions that you can easily find the answer to on the website, because that can be annoying. And, you know, and then they'll, oh, the other point I wanted to make was, if you don't get a response, don't take it personally, okay? Faculty are getting emails from a lot of students. Some faculty don't respond to email in general. Some faculty may take their time getting back, but don't take it personally. I sometimes, if it's a faculty member that a student really, really wants to try to connect with, oftentimes I'll make that connection. Even then, it's not a guarantee. But you know, again, that's the reason why you keep it brief, because they're not going to read a short novel. You want to get straight to the point and get their attention.
And can I
in a positive way?
Right. And can I add this one thing? And Dr. Neon, you can let me know if you. I have been told stories of faculty members who have gotten emails from students, positive emails, and they never responded. But when the student's name came up in an admissions committee, the faculty member said, "Oh yeah, I've heard from that student, blah, 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 blah." And I didn't have an interest. So the fact that you don't get a response, don't take it personally. But I have heard, I can say more than 3 stories of faculty members who had heard from students, didn't respond to their emails, because sometimes that's just their style, or a time thing. But when it came down to admissions, the faculty members said, yeah, based on what I've read about the student's application and the email, I'm in favor of the student.
I think that happens probably more than you know. So it's definitely good, but think carefully about how you craft that email, right? Even if you have to run it by a faculty member, but someone who you trust, because the worst thing you can do is to send an email message that's full of errors, okay? Because that also leaves an impression, which is not a good one.
Not your friends, no emojis, no, these are professional emails, no slang, check your punctuation, yes, please.
Staying on the subject of reaching out to individuals at these prospective programs, when do you suggest beginning that process? And who should you contact first, graduate students or faculty or administrators?
I would say if you're in your junior year, you should start the process of doing the background research on the institutions you have an interest in. And then once you do a little bit of research, you may send the brief email to a few faculty. And you might simultaneously reach out to students. There's no real order. If you're seniors, you need to start doing that process now. Most applications become available mid-August. And for a lot of engineering programs, they're due by mid-December. So that process, I wouldn't wait until the fall semester begins. So if you're seniors, you should be engaging in that now. Juniors, you probably don't want to, as sophomores, you might want to get a sense of looking at the institution, but I think that's too early to start reaching out to faculty. There, you should take advantage of participating in summer programs where you can then speak to faculty in that forum. So that's my recommendation.
Yes, and please do not write to faculty members, or actually anyone, unless you have something to say. That is, you should make sure that the purpose of your email aligns with your mission toward understanding the department, program, admissions, etc. Don't reach out to ask them, do you all have research, or does this department do research? That's something you can find online. That's another thing. As Dr. Neron said, please try not to, whether it's by email, whether you're meeting us at a conference, whether it's an in-person visit, don't ask questions where the answers are already where you can find them.
So speaking of preparing for your application, one student asks, I've heard many times that it's best to give your recommenders a packet of information with your resume, CV, etc., to help them write the letter of recommendation. However, in what way would that make the letter of recommendation strong if the letter will contain information about you that was already submitted through your grad application in the resume and CV section?
So you want the recommenders. So first of all, you should take time to think about who you want to write these letters. These are individuals who should not only know you academically, but also personally, right? That you've developed an academic relationship with. And what someone like that will be able to do is not just simply regurgitate what they see in the personal statement that you've written or in your CV. They will elaborate on things, right? And so they'll talk about you academically, but they'll also talk about you as an individual. And what we're looking for in these programs are students who are going to persist, particularly for PhD programs. So you want to be careful. You want to give them enough information because they are likely to be writing letters of recommendation for multiple students, okay? And it helps them to kind of refocus and maybe add a certain layer of personalization by being able to see what research you've done, and then they can comment on, your ability. So you want someone who's going to be able to write you an exceptional letter of recommendation. And so they'll take all of this into consideration. They won't just simply regurgitate it. They'll add to it. So it actually complements the application package when you have exceptional letters of recommendation, because those are the kinds of letters that you're competing against.
Yeah, so on an academic level, remember that these are typically faculty members or researchers speaking to other faculty members / researchers. So that's on one level. It's a peer-to-peer conversation endorsing you. The best way I explain it to students is, as Dr. Neron says, the letters that they write typically are not going to be just the information that's in your CV. Oh, and also don't forget to include a later copy of your statement of purpose, not one of your early ones, one of your later ones, either complete or near complete. Because this letter is going to be like the background singers and the statement of purpose is going to be your song. Got it? So if you can, or it's going to, with this statement of purpose, you're the lead singer, and these letters of rec are in your background. And if you can think about some songs you like, you know how you always have that strong lead, but that background can make it just boom, just pop. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to substantiate the things that you say, and there's also some things that they can do that you can't. So for example, in your statement of purpose, you can talk about if you were one of the students who might have had, a hiccup during one of your semesters and it doesn't look like the others. It's the faculty members who can say through their letters that, I've known this student, you can take a look at her record, it's all fantastic. And this bad semester is not at all indicative of who she is and what her scholarly potential is.
And you also want to make sure that your letters of recommendation are coming from other faculty. Can't stress that enough. You don't want advanced graduate students to write these letters or postdocs, even though during like a summer program, if you're in, you may be working closely with a postdoc or a graduate student, but you don't want them to write the letter. You need these letters, again, it's faculty reading what other faculty are saying about you. So you need to make sure that those letters are coming from faculty members.
And on that point, I'll say the only exception is, let's say, for example, school requires 3, but will allow you to have 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. If you choose at least the first two, and probably the third should be from faculty members. However, if there is something really compelling about you that no one else has said, that would be the exception. And of course, you have to use your strong judgment to consider what is compelling. Like, for example, you might have had somebody who worked with you doing some kind of co-curricular activity. Let's say you were a member of the Sackness chapter or the Nesby chapter, and your chapter of the year with its outreach and teaching did something phenomenal. Because that's important, because although research is important, that faculty members also are teachers, and to know that you have an interest in teaching and that you've done something at different levels can be helpful. But it definitely should not be a letter from a non-faculty member should not be your first or your second.
Does that extend to if a student worked at an industry internship, a summer research internship, that it was with a company or with in a government lab, should they still avoid that letter recommendation?
So that could be the third, sorry, that could be like the third letter or the supplemental, like fourth letter if you're submitting. But I would say a minimum, I would agree with Dr. Brunson, at least two of your, most institutions require 3 letters, at least 2 should come from faculty.
Yeah. Even that person in industry, particularly if that person has a PhD and what you did that summer was hardcore research. That makes a big difference. So, and it could also be, now here's the kicker, that there could be some instances where that person that you work with in industry could be a former faculty member. So then you've got a twofer. But again, make sure that your number 1 and your number 2 are faculty members. The only exception with one of those, I would say in that case, Dr. Niram, what do you think? In case you have that, that PhD in industry who actually was, the direct hands-on contact mentor, research advisor.
The other thing would be if you decide, because I think one of the earlier questions about taking time off before doing the master's or PhD, if you take, say, 3, 4, 5 years off, which I'm not necessarily recommending, the individuals who can speak about you in the most informed way may be the individuals that you've been working with during that time that you've been out of academia. In which case, I would strongly recommend that you try to keep in contact with faculty in your undergrad, but also, carefully select. It should come across in the narrative that you've been working X number of years if you only have 1 faculty letter. You should still try to get 2, but only if there are 2 faculty that you've been maintaining contact with. And that's why networking is key. Particularly if you decide to take some time off, make sure, 1, you're trying to do something that's relevant to engineering for your professional development, but then also keep in contact with your faculty with, thinking in mind that at some point you may need a letter of recommendation from them.
So speaking of the difference between academia and industry, or perhaps government, this next question, Dr. Niran, is for you. What was the decision process for you to return to academia? Do you feel there's a difference in how many people you could impact in academia versus industry?
So the latter half is partially why I decided to stay in academia. The motivation behind returning to academia to do the PhD was initially I was as high as I was going to get in the one particular company I was in. It was a small company. They were doing automotive consulting. And it was a small group of about 15 engineers. And I was basically plateaued there. And so my initial intent was to go back, do the PhD, and to potentially go right back into industry. But when I did the PhD, I saw academia in a slightly different way, having come back as an older student. And then when I subsequently went on and did the postdoc, which was actually a short-lived one, about 6 months, but then I was asked to join the faculty. So everything kind of aligned. It's why you should always be on the lookout for opportunities that knock. You just never know. If you were to ask me, was that going to be my career trajectory? I probably would have said no, okay? Truth is, the trajectory that I laid out was very different than what actually happened. So a lot of thought went into it. And the good part about when I finally decided to go back was that I had a better sense of having been in industry, for me, again, it's a personal thing, of what I really wanted to do at the PhD level. when I graduated with my bachelor's and even master's, I was not thinking along the lines of doing a PhD. But that time in between, and then doing my homework and investigating, led me to think a lot deeper in terms of what I wanted to do. And then I've been in academia ever since. I have done consulting on the side, so it's not that you're locked into academia. You can certainly do, that's the beauty of engineering, I think. I think that you have many options available to you. So that was the rationale behind that.
So since many students are considering taking some time off, this next question is relevant to that. What is your advice for this year's PhD application cycle, given that many universities are not accepting students due to financial instability? Do you suggest waiting for next year's upcoming application season and getting an industry job that's hopefully related to research in your field in the meantime?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because our current situation, it may even be difficult to find a job. But because institutions, this is new terrain for institutions. You know, most courses are being taught online. It's difficult to do in person, although labs are opening up with a lot of safety precautions. If you're thinking about going into industry, you should probably start looking, or if you're not already in the process of looking, but it's not a bad time to do so. So you should do that, but also think about, what in the context of whatever job you end up getting, if you do go into industry, how could that relate to what you might want to do with the PhD? The other good thing there is, if you're in industry, remember we said that if you decide to do a master's, you generally have to pay for that. Oftentimes companies will pay for your master's. So that's another, actually a good reason to potentially get the job. Oftentimes employers will cover, if not all, most of the master's. And then that'll give you some time, because again, this admission season is probably going to be very different than they have been in the past.
Yeah, it's going to be quite difficult to anticipate what's really going to happen. Universities are figuring out how they're reopening in the fall. But as Dr. Neron said, graduate applications open in mid to late August, typically for all of us. But that process still goes on, and universities are acting as if we're going to do what we do, which is answer problems or figure out problems. So the admissions is one thing. And so the decision to not go directly to graduate school or to do so, I would say you should act as if you're going to go directly to graduate school, because one of the options you have is, if you are given an offer, many universities will give you the options to defer in case something else happens. So now you're still applying to, as long as you know you really want to do this, you're still applying to the graduate school. But if it looks as if things might change, there's nothing that stops you from interviewing with companies. So you have to figure out what's in your best interest.
And oftentimes you can defer for up to a year. So that's, you might want to do both. You may want to apply for industry positions and apply to graduate school, because it can't hurt to have a backup plan, especially in this environment.
This next question is very close to my heart, since I'm a huge fan of interdisciplinarity. How can you find out if a department or a grad program has more of a collaborative interdisciplinary atmosphere, or if it is more of an individualistic environment regarding research and PIs?
Well, that's pretty easy.
Go ahead. You can take that one.
So there's a number of ways that you can do it. One is, so it depends on how you define that. And let me give you an example. So my former boss, who was the dean of the graduate school, also a tenured professor, was professor of physics, professor of electrical engineering, and one other faculty member. So you can look at the faculty titles, and that will give you some idea about interdisciplinary, about the interdisciplinary nature of the program. Also, I can tell you that many of the major research institutions, it's extremely interdisciplinary. because that's how they get things done. And that's probably why they're a major research institution. So if you're talking about, again, major research institutions, that's typically not a problem. What could be a problem is an individual faculty member who may not want you as her or his student to be, they might want their research to be more narrow. But in general, that's quite common. The question is how easily. You should look at the size of the campus. If you see on the size of that campus that there is on that campus a school of medicine, a school of engineering, a school of science, et cetera, you know that because of the proximity on that campus, that it's probably very interdisciplinary because they are even physically proximate to each other. Dr. Newman.
Mm-hmm. And even, oftentimes at the PhD level, the nature of your research is just inherently interdisciplinary. So most institutions, you're only allowed to apply to one department or program. But that doesn't mean that you can't subsequently work with other faculty from other departments, right? So if you're applying to mechanical engineering, but there is like combustion component to whatever it is that you want to do, there's nothing to preclude you from also working with faculty in chemistry. If there's some kind of environmental focus, there's nothing to keep you from working with faculty in the School of Forestry, Environmental Studies, something along those lines. So this is expected, and it happens very often, actually more often than not.
Not only that, I think Michelle might be common at Yale also, but I think it could be common, is it is not unusual, depending on your specific research, that there's even a member of your dissertation committee who is not even a member of your institution. And again, these committees, these research advising committees, their objective is to provide the expertise that you need. And sometimes that expertise can come not only outside of the university, but even slightly outside of the discipline. But the undergirding thought is, does it make sense?
We have 2 questions from aspiring astronomers asking for what skills and experiences you recommend for ongoing university and graduate study.
So that was actually the field that I initially wanted to pursue, astronomy, that led to astrophysics, eventually aeronautical engineering. And some of that was kind of guided by what institutions were offering. And so I think, during if you have an interest in astronomy, you should certainly get a sense of what the faculty are doing, dig deep into the faculty research. But how to prepare for that at the undergraduate level would be to take, as many courses as you can, certainly within the department. If you have an astronomy department, make sure you take enough math courses. Try to get a sense of what your first year classes would be like in the graduate school program, because that'll help you to kind of filter, especially if you're early on, right? If you're a sophomore and you're thinking about doing a PhD in astronomy, get a sense of some of the courses that you would be required to take for that PhD, and that can kind of help to guide you in some of the fundamental courses you should take at the undergraduate level. But again, a lot of this, read what the faculty are doing and then kind of let that be your guide for what courses you subsequently decide to take. So definitely physics, engineering, regardless of what field you want to go into, calculus, physics are your fundamental fields that you want to do as much as possible in.
Yeah, and in the astronomy, make sure you look at not only your undergraduate curriculum, but as Dr. Neron said, in the graduate curriculum, look at the what they'll have different names for the core requirements, but also to make sure that the training that you would like in astronomy is going to be available. And the other thing too is, in your discipline, you must be very independent, because much of what you do is theoretical and requires a lot of It requires a lot of work done alone before you can go and collaborate. And the other thing is, as many astronomers, make sure you have a very unrestricted imagination, because of the level of creativity that I've seen from the astronomers. I know one of them, she's a Yale PhD, Jedidah Eisler.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's astrophysics, my bad. But still, there are levels of creativity that are associated with astronomy, because your work is very, very different.
You should also try to get exposure to using observatories, right? Because, telescopes. And, for example, one of the courses I took when I was thinking about this was observing the stars and planets. And it met in the evenings from 8 o'clock to midnight, which was interesting. But we, in order to see the stars, we had to drive, off campus to the observatory. And nighttime is the prime time to see the stars. So it requires a lot of commitment. Especially if the time commitment is there for any of these fields, but especially the time of day for astronomers. You want to make sure that you get that time in the observatories.
So we've been discussing a lot of really cool things: creativity, working independently, working collaboratively, pursuing different problems that you're excited about. And that sets up this next question, which is, what were the most rewarding parts of your PhD experiences?
Mine was when I finally figured out what I was doing. And that may sound overly simplistic, but what I found was the work that I did as an undergraduate made more sense to me when I did my master's degree. What I did for my master's degree made more sense to me when I finally started doing the PhD. And when I finally started teaching, a lot of what I was doing for the PhD started to make much more sense. So, it's the most rewarding part is this journey of learning, right? Because it's never ending. And what you'll find is, as you start to really process and get into your thesis, you're going to spend the bulk of your 5 or 6 years pursuing the PhD, reading a lot of papers. Before you can make an original contribution to the field, you have to know what other people have done before you, right? And the only way to do that is through what they call a literature review. So you will read tons of papers. And then finally one day, something's going to click and you're going to say, okay, but what if we approached it in this way? And then when you start digging deeper, those are the really fulfilling moments. There were a lot of difficult times, okay, but those were really the good times that I remember.
Yeah, Dr. Neron describes it making a contribution. You have to keep in mind that the PhD is a knowledge creation degree. That is, you're going to add new knowledge to the world. And to do that, it's going to require you to search and then research and research. There is a lot of work that goes into it. And for me, I think the most rewarding part was that whole process of research, discovery, innovation, et cetera, and that process of inquiry was actually knowing or learning how much I actually knew. And what I mean by that is you ask so many questions about so many things, so many times in so many ways that you just find out there are things that you know. And sometimes you don't even know what you might know something, and then someone will ask you a question, or you'll be in a seminar at a conference or something, at a session at a conference, and someone will ask, and then you're like, I know the answer. And which can sometimes be problematic when you are in a conference session and you hear someone give an answer like, no, that's not correct. But for me, the most rewarding thing was this whole process of of critical thinking and analytical reasoning, and knowing how to ask questions and answer questions, and knowing how much I knew.
Mm-hmm. You know, the other thing I would add to that is, you know, certainly the scholarship was important and thrilling, but it was also the skill sets that I learned along the way. And those skill sets are transferable, which is how I was able to navigate from being an academic to being in industry, back to being an academic. And just even the areas that I'm working in. I'm not doing turbulence research right now, but I could be, right? And it's always.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help but laugh at academic turbulence.
Well, yeah, well, that's a whole other story. But I have the flexibility because of the skill sets. The skill sets are transferable, right? Mm-hmm. So I could go from being a faculty member to being an administrator. I could conceivably go back into being a faculty member. I could go back into industry. I mean, the options are really endless. And I think that's the beauty of getting the PhD. You're not locked into one thing.
So we have a question regarding how to maximize your research experiences and your applications. So the question is, I'm told that I don't have to have too much experience, but at least show personal growth from the experiences that I've had. So some students may have a lot, other students may only have a couple. How does a student who only has a couple show personal growth from the experiences to become eligible for a PhD program?
So that's a tough question, okay? Because oftentimes for a PhD program, we're looking for prior research experience. So there has to be some research experience. And if you don't have enough, maybe the post-bac route or the master's route might be a better fit. But the way that you try to explain your story, right, your narrative, is through your resume, through the personal statement, and you don't want the information. You want to be able to. I want to be able to look at the resume or CV and get a snapshot of who you are, right? And so with your experience, you would just kind of highlight bullets. And in the personal statement or statement of purpose, that's where you elaborate, right? So I want to get a sense of, I can look at the resume and get a sense of, okay, you had 3 or 4 summer internships, or you had 1 summer's worth of research. But then I go to the personal statement and you elaborate and talk about that research. That could make the difference, right? Then simply explaining, for example, if you only had 1 summer of research and you just kind of under explain it in a statement of purpose, that could do damage, right? Whereas if you take the time to really explain it and then maybe talk about your trajectory to get there, that could go a long way. So it really depends.
Yeah, I would say the 2 things or 2 ways I would tell you to do this is in that statement of purpose, there are places where you talk about your research experience. And this is your chance to shine, where you tell what you did, why you did it. That is, why does anybody care why this is being done? What you found, and end it, what it all means. Meaning, what did you learn from that? How did this contribute to your continued engagement in science? And the second, which can probably be even more important for if you have less research experience, your letters of recommendation. Remember, this is a chance where, again, you have faculty member researchers speaking to other faculty member researchers. And the lack of experience that you have, if you choose the right letter of the right recommender, that person could, in their letter, their endorsement for you, talk about, despite the lack of experience that he's had, his intellect, his curiosity, his ability to collaborate is unique, and if they could say something, it's something that I have rarely seen in my 20 years of being a faculty member. So that is where something small can become something bigger. So again, it goes back to what Dr. Neron said about properly choosing your recommenders. If you have little experience, then this is the time where your background singers can really make your song, okay?
Mm-hmm.
When reaching out to faculty that you're trying to have an informational interview with or gather more information about the program, should you attach your resume to that email?
Sometimes people do, sometimes they don't. You can, but in all honesty, unless this is your maybe second time communicating, in which case the first time you communicated, you received a response from the faculty member. And if they said, I'm really interested in what you're thinking about, send me your resume. That would be a surefire way to send it. But to just send it along with the email, they may or may not look at it. It can't hurt, certainly. But oftentimes, unless there's something compelling about what you're writing in that initial email, they may or may not look at the resume. However, you should always keep an up-to-date resume because you just never know when someone might request it. And if they do request it, you don't want to wait 2 or 3 weeks because you're now trying to put something together. If they request it, you want to have it ready so that you can send it immediately.
So for some career paths, the example that the student gave here is computer science, research opportunities this summer are much more feasible than others. Like, for example, if you need to go into a wet lab. How are the admissions committees going to take that into consideration?
Look, institutions know that for the most part, almost all of us were shut down this summer. It's if yours is as we call a wet lab or something that you have to be doing in person, institutions will understand that. This is one of the reasons why it's beneficial to gain as much research experience as you can. That does not preclude you from having curiosity about something and doing some online research about it and possibly consulting a faculty member whose research you're interested in. But it's tough, but we've had this discussion already and we know that this is going to be a very, very unusual admissions year. And, as institutions, we're going to make the adjustments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that one. Mm-hmm. It's a new environment for all of us. You will certainly not be penalized in any way because obviously your health and safety are a priority. So institutions know that we're in this environment. It will be taken into consideration. Mm-hmm.
Right. We don't expect you to have an organic chemistry synthesis lab in your house, and if you do, you should probably keep it to yourself.
And a follow-up question to that. So if, for example, one of the participants in our professional development program, were planning on going to a research opportunity, but then it got canceled. Can they also put that on their resume?
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And that goes a long way. It just shows that they applied, because to get into these programs, you do have to apply, and it's generally competitive. So it's good for us to know that you applied, got in, and we recognize why perhaps the program had to be canceled.
Yeah, I agree. We have one of the smaller programs compared to some of our peers, but sometimes you might have been 10 applicants, one of 10 applicants accepted out of 700, 800 applications. That's a big deal. So
another aspect of the application, returning to the question of faculty recommenders, is it looked down on to have faculty members who work with you in fields that aren't necessarily related to the program you're applying to?
No, it's fine, because while you're an undergrad, you should be experimenting and getting a feel for different, there are some students who may know exactly what they want to do and their research experiences. They may have 3 summers in the same lab, right? But then there may be others who might have 3 summers and completely 3 different labs. That's fine. We just want you to have research experience and exposure.
Absolutely. As an undergrad, I was a chemistry major. I did 3 undergraduate research projects, one in biochemistry, one in biochemical engineering and the other in biophysics. So yeah, but what your story it will be in your statement of purpose, even though you talked about letters of recommendation, is in your statement of purpose is to express what it is you learned and how each of these projects contributed to your curiosity and your commitment to pursue research as a PhD student.
And also what skill sets you developed, right? So it's what you did is important again, but also what skill sets did you learn by being in those unique environments? And that could be, you know, you learned how to use a new piece of equipment, anything along those lines.
In what ways does the application process differ between a master's program and a PhD program?
So for the PhD program, in the personal statement is where you'll see, or statement of purpose, where you'll see some differences. For the PhD, the emphasis is going to be on research, prior research experience, you know, your research interests and how it ties into the research being conducted in the department. So it's very research focused. For the master's, even if you're doing a research-based master's, which is not your only option, you could be doing an all-course master's. You really want to stick to the actual question, okay? And oftentimes the question is, you know, tell us a little bit about your past experiences and how they influenced your interest in your current and in the field that you have an interest in. So the master's doesn't necessarily have to focus on research. That's one major difference. The other major difference, as we've been saying throughout, is from an economic standpoint. The PhDs are generally paid for, the masters are not. And so there may be an opportunity there, though, to make the argument for financial aid or something along those lines, which is not that typically the master's is paid for completely, and that would be a non-issue for master's programs.
That's basically.
I mean, for PhD, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Keep in mind that the PhD is more research based, and the master's degree there could be a stronger emphasis on the what after, the professional development part. Yeah.
If you're going into industry, how do you keep in touch with faculty? And how does that intersect with often the advice of, you know, don't write unless you have something to say?
Well, you know, as an undergrad, you should be developing academic relationships with some of your faculty. That doesn't mean that you should be stalking them and, you know, showing up at the doorstep like every day or even every week, but you're allowing them to get to know you academically, right? So having conversations with them. And then most faculty want to follow your progress when you leave. And you might say, you know, when you're leaving will it be okay if I keep in contact with you? I'm thinking about possibly doing a master's or PhD, but not right away. And I'd like to potentially consider you, I might request a letter of recommendation from you. Would it be okay if I keep in contact and periodically let you know what I'm doing? There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think faculty appreciate honesty. So someone, if they might, and I've had some students come to me like that. And there are some students that I still am writing letters for 10 years, 15 years later. And they keep in contact. And so after a while, there are some students who will just constantly keep in contact with you, and you just know who they are. So when they, you know, what you don't want to do is leave, not say anything, and then reach out to them 5 years later, and they're trying to figure out who you are. Right? Yes. That would be a big mistake. So just try, you know, even if you just send them a quick email every 5 or 6 months, just to, you know, refresh their memory. And if you're going to be working, if you think that you're going to be working for maybe a year or two, you might want to do this maybe initially every 3 to 4 months.
3 to 4 months.
And then, you know, you can spread it out a little bit more, because then they'll really know who you are. And they're kind of engaged, invested in your future. But I say honesty is the best approach. If you're thinking about doing a master's or PhD and you're going into industry first, let your faculty know that that's the case and that at some point you'd like to come back to them for a letter of recommendation. They'll keep that in the back of their mind.
Yeah, and in keeping in contact with them, let them know what you're doing, any highlights, any lowlights, yeah, I would say this should be an extension of interactions that you had as an undergrad. That's why it's really, really important that you start cultivating relationships with faculty members who could possibly be advocates for you by way of that letter of recommendation. But keeping in contact, if you're going to do a master's degree, again, every 3 to 4 months. If you're going to be away longer, at least not later than every 6 months, because you don't want to get your name off of the radar.
Mm-hmm. And when you write, don't send a novel. Okay, just the highlights of what, the highlights. And this might be an opportunity where you do want to ask, how are you doing, right?
Yes, the 5 sentences or less, because they know you.
Right, and you can do a little bit more than 5 sentences, maybe a paragraph, not too much more. But yes, so that's, you should reach out and maintain contact with them. Yes,
the 5 sentences were mainly for what we call the cold introduction. Yeah, you're just writing somebody you don't know. Because yeah, this is somebody you know. So I guess we can give you 2 5-sentence paragraphs.
If a student has a non-engineering major, such as physics, chemistry, or biochemistry, what would you advise, or would you advise pursuing a master's before applying to a PhD in biomedical engineering?
No. At the undergraduate level, you're taking all of the foundational courses for engineering, which would be the hard sciences, which would be your calculus. So it would be, calculus, maybe linear algebra. You'd be taking the physics, the chemistry, the biology. And so when we're looking at applicants for engineering disciplines, we're not only looking at students who are coming from undergraduate degrees in engineering. We're looking for students who are coming from hardcore sciences as well as the mathematics, because those are the fundamental or the foundational courses for engineering.
And what you have to do is, in your statement of purpose, along with the selection of your recommenders, is you have to show 2 things: why that makes sense, and that why that transition makes sense, and that it can make sense. Meaning that you've done it, you know what you've done, you know what, as Dr. Noah said, what skill sets you have an idea, the kinds of research projects that you're interested in, and you will explain that in your statement of purpose. Because remember, your statement of purpose, it's a narrative. It's your telling the story of why this department, program, etc., will be insane to not have you. So you've got to craft that narrative. So I would say, although yeah, it's not a big issue, that you definitely have to show that that transition can happen and that it makes sense.
The other thing is faculty may have joint appointments, right? So again, it gets to this, I need to look at the faculty backgrounds and titles and look at their research, because they may have a joint appointment between the chemistry department and the chemical engineering department, right? And that's actually happens more often than not. Mm-hmm.
Along this theme of transitions, do you recommend, or what fellowships do you recommend applying to during your senior year? And I guess this can both be for post-bac, prep, bridge, but also perhaps fellowships while you're applying to get into graduate school.
So the 2 that come to mind would be the GEM fellowship, GEM, and also the NSF, National Science Foundation. Those would be the 2 that most students will be applying to for engineering fields. If you're thinking about the biomedical engineering, you might also want to look out for the NIH, National Institutes of Health. Sometimes you might be able to find something with the Ford Foundation for engineering, although that might be more in the humanities, social sciences. But you never know. But there is money out there. And if you are thinking about the master's route, there are fellowships out there that fund master's programs. I'm personally of the mindset that you shouldn't have to pay for graduate school, and that you should do your due diligence to try to find funding. There is a lot of funding out there, but you do have to make the effort to apply. Okay, and again, just like the graduate school admissions application, you need to put together a thoughtful and compelling application.
So we have a question about cohort size. Should I be concerned if there are little to no students who are participating in a specific PhD program I'm interested in?
That's probably not going to happen. You know, so okay, if you're thinking in terms of a really small department, it's fine. I mean, it really depends. If you're in a small department, you'll get more personalized attention. If you're in an institution and the programs are really large, you'll still get, you know, attention. But I don't think that there's an issue in either scenario. Again, it really gets to, I think you should be thinking more along the lines of what you're doing and the potential faculty advisors, as opposed to the size of the cohort.
Yeah, the size of the cohort, I would argue probably more important could be the size of the applicant pool,
Right.
Because that's going to determine, or that's going to have a lot to say, because even, let's say, for example, pick up a large department of mechanical engineering. Well, the way they do the admissions could be set up into sub-disciplines of mechanical engineering. So that's why cohort size can be misleading. But if you have, let's say there are 5 sub-disciplines in mechanical engineering, and one of them is going to select 5 and the other select 15, but the 5 only have 15, but the 15 has 300, you see where your odds are. So it's pool size that's more important, but you can't determine that. There's really no way for you to know, because applicant pool sizes change every year.
Mm-hmm.
But you just concentrate on doing the best application that you can.
So speaking of articulating that most compelling application, do you think some programs would want you to pursue one career path over another, e.g. academia versus industry?
Not anymore.
Okay.
Say not anymore, because again, the world is, and faculty members recognize that students are changing. And particularly in STEM disciplines, where you can go into academia, you can go into industry, you can go into government. And because your STEM discipline is so, the training that you get is so analytical, you have so many more options. This is not necessarily true for your colleagues who are in social science and humanist disciplines. It's different, even though, you know, the job options are different. I think it's more of there's a lot more tradition with it. But in a STEM discipline, no. I think that there's a recognition that students go everywhere. And if you look at who's funding research now, it's not just government, it's private industries, it's corporations, et cetera. So, Dr. Nira.
No, I agree. I think, you know, there's most of the faculty in engineering programs, you know, they're not set on you being strictly an academic or going into industry. And, you know, as Dr. Brunson said, that's more of an issue and it was, and that's changing now, especially in this current economic landscape that we're in. We're recognizing that, you know, students may have to, for a short period of time, even if they want to pursue an academic career path, they may have to do something else in the interim until the economy picks up, until institutions start hiring faculty again. So by virtue of where we are, things are being forced, even across the divisions now. But I think traditionally in engineering and a lot of the STEM fields, the faculty are more open to students pursuing, academic trajectories and or industry. So if the question is being motivated by what you should put in the personal statement, you put what you genuinely think you have an interest in doing. That would be my recommendation. Again, it gets back to this level of being honest with yourself, because if you're interested in doing one particular thing and no one's interested in supporting you in that, then that particular institution may not be a good fit for you.
What was the most difficult aspect of your PhD?
Ooh. So we can take turns.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that you have to worry about, particularly in STEM disciplines, is, and it happens, is there will come a time where 90-ish% of what you're doing is just not going to work. And it has nothing to do with you. It is this whole process that you are creating knowledge. You are attempting to answer a question that no one else before you has answered. You don't know the answer. It's just that because of your training, you know how to go about pursuing that answer. But you are pursuing it. Think about it like this, the simple way is you're trying to make a dish and you just know what that dish is. You just know how you want it to taste. And you've got a whole bunch of seasonings and spices, etc. And, again, you want to talk about, you don't necessarily know the right ratio. And so you experiment. And it's just, gosh darn it, this is not quite right. This is too salty. This is too spicy. This is too savory. This is, that is the one thing that, and it's difficult to work with students because it can be really frustrating. And that period where upwards of 90% of the things are not working, it could be 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, year and a half. But that's probably why we have so few PhDs, because it's not something that a lot of people are going to tolerate. It can take a toll on you psychologically. Dr. Nira.
Yeah, I would agree with what Dr. Brunson said, but also I think for me, the difficult part was really trying to figure out how to get through the process. Okay, because there's, you will run into obstacles. I don't know very many individuals who've gone through PhD programs and there wasn't some type of obstacle in the way. And trying to get a feel for who are your advocates, who is your community of support, and being able to rely on them during the difficult times. And it could be not individuals in the school, it could be family members, it could be friends who are going to help you get through those difficult times. And so for me, it was really trying to, during those difficult times, figuring out how to get past and motivating myself and not convincing myself, I had a great job. I can always go right back into industry. I don't need to finish this, okay? Because there will be times when you're going to say, okay, you know what, this is not for me. I'm going to quit. And getting past that mindset, that was difficult. But eventually I did.
Yeah, I can't underscore the importance of your network.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Nero can share her experiences, but one of the things that we find is it's not necessarily academics that causes students to not complete a program. There are other issues, other things, but your network is extremely important. What do you do when things go wrong? Who do you talk to? And it's necessary. That's why this whole COVID situation that has forced us to be more isolated, and you're forced to contact people by phone, by text message, by Zoom. But your network in helping to give you that support. And I think that's also something that's really important about PhD programs you shouldn't just look at the faculty members of research, but also look at what other services the institution provides, because it's all part of this puzzle. And these pieces have to put together in a way that can be functional for you. And so that's part of that research, we talked about in choosing a program, but also make sure you look at the other ones, because you cannot separate your emotional, your psychological, your physical well-being from your intellectual well-being.
The other thing is, keep in mind that life doesn't stop just because you're in graduate school. In fact, it should not, because you will be missing out on a lot of potentially amazing experiences, both inside and outside of the academy. So that's why it's important to have like a support system in place.
What advice would you give to students who want to pursue a PhD and then become a faculty member specifically?
Mm-hmm. So if you want to pursue a PhD, if you want to become a faculty member, that's certainly the first step. But during the process, I think one of the things that a lot of PhD students don't do is because they're heavily immersed in the now, right? And it's not until maybe their next to last or their last year that they start thinking about, okay, especially if they want to stay in academia, putting together their teaching philosophy, right? Because oftentimes that's something, so you need to think about what your teaching style is. Look into writing statements along those lines. You also want to get a sense of, for engineering, what it's like to be in an environment where you're actually writing grants a lot of the time. So early on, you should be trying to get exposure to grant writing, because that's something else that you'll be doing as an academic. Get some sense of what it's like to publish, okay? Understanding that whole process, which is more than just simply writing up your results and turning it in. That's a whole process that oftentimes a lot of graduate students don't have exposure to until it's very close to graduating. Many students will publish their thesis, in which case that's the first time they come into exposure to what the whole publishing process is like. So I would say throughout your time, start thinking about these things. And you should also have mentors, okay? I can't overemphasize the need for mentors. Let your faculty members know that, you want to be on an academic career path and have multiple mentors, because these are individuals that you're going to hopefully model, and hopefully they're great role models, right? So be careful, because not all faculty are good role models. So you may need to select people who are going to be your mentors outside of the department or program. But just try to get a sense of what is it like, and even start asking faculty, what's a typical day like for you? What is, getting a sense of, because the life of an academic is very different than the life of a student. Okay.
When it comes to your teaching experience, think about it like this. There are opportunities that you might have. And again, this is particularly at, I shouldn't say that. You should check with an institution to find out if they have something. It'll have a different name. It could have the Center for Teaching or the Center for Teaching Education, et cetera. And many of these centers, offices will provide you with theoretical and practical experience, and might even offer something like a certificate in teaching. And think about it like this: it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. But if you know you want to go into academia, that is definitely something you want to do. You could be in a department or program that may not have undergrads, so you may not be required to do any teaching. If that's the case, it's necessary. You can possibly be able to find other experiences, see whether you could possibly, depending on your advisor, to look at a weekend or summer weekend experience teaching at a community college. That way you're not interfering with, your normal research schedule during Monday through Fridays. It's not unusual. There's some folks who want to work 6 or 7 days a week. I'm not going to discourage that, but what I would say is that balance in your life. And so with being a faculty member, that's another thing, that you must understand balance in your life, between teaching and research and grant writing and existing outside of that. You must strike a balance that is going to work for you. Otherwise, something's going to go over. And there's always somehow where something's going to tip over, something's going to be more, something's going to be less. But for the most part, you want to be able to know what balance looks like so that you can establish boundaries. You could say, I gotta write this grant. You might also need to get out and get some air, breathe, might go for a walk, etc. So all of those are part of being an academic. And the more balance you have, I think probably the more content you'll be, because when those unexpected things come up, which we, faculty call crises, we in administration call them everyday life, you'll be better. Do we not, Michelle? That's everyday life.
Exactly.
So a question regarding judging whether or not you've sort of accumulated enough experience versus going to a postbac. So one student asks if I have almost 3 years of hands-on research experience, should I apply for a postbac in order to be competitive for a PhD?
Not necessarily, right? People apply for postbacs for different reasons, right? It's not always because you don't have enough experience. Some students apply to postbacs because they're not entirely certain about what the whole PhD experience is. And that's a year. Most postbac programs are a year long, and you're immersed in a year of PhD level research. So you really get a sense of what it's like to be a first-year graduate student in a lot of postbac programs. Now, some students may also have enough research to potentially apply directly to graduate school, but they may want to get a little more exposure to something that's related to their field, okay? You should not use the postbac to pursue a field that's completely different from your undergraduate training. In fact, it would be difficult for you to get into a postbac if it's in something that's, let's say you're in engineering and then you want to do a postbac in English, okay? That's probably not going to work. But if you're in physics, right, and you've been doing everything that's pretty much grounded in physics, your research has been grounded in physics, and you want to get a little more exposure to perhaps astrophysics, then doing a postbac might be a good pathway for you. So it's not necessarily if you have enough research, would a postbac still benefit? It really depends on your motivation for what you want to do with the PhD. How do you want to actually prepare for it? Oftentimes students apply to graduate school and postbac programs at the same time. And obviously if you get into graduate school, great. But if you don't, you have a backup plan. And I'm a huge proponent for having a backup plan.
Yeah, despite the fact that you had a lot of research experience, the other question remains your theoretical background. Mm-hmm. How did you do in the courses? Because remember, as part of that admissions, the faculty admissions committee has to believe that you have a solid enough academic background to be able to pursue and pass the courses that you're going to take in graduate school with a minimum of a B. So if you have a lot of research experience, but your grades are just okay, you may want to consider a postbac program that has additional coursework. And you have to find out the emphasis of the program. Does the program emphasize research? Do they emphasize coursework? Is it a combination? And there's some postbacs that are, most of them are about a year, but there's some where there's a possibility of doing a 2-year. Mm-hmm. But you have to know what it is that you think that you're lacking, or what it is that you think you'd like to strengthen, and then pursue the opportunity that way.
Are graduate students always required to teach classes, or does it depend on the program / university?
I think it depends on the institution. A lot of institutions do require, like it could be 2 semesters of teaching, maybe 3 or 4 semesters. It really depends on the institution. But oftentimes it's actually, if you have an opportunity to teach while you're in a PhD program, you should definitely take advantage of it, because it's only going to enhance, one, it's the skill sets. It gets back down to the skill sets. And 2, when you're teaching something, you tend to learn it at a much deeper level. So it's one thing if the institution doesn't provide teaching experiences, but if they do, oftentimes there is a minimum number of semesters that you do have to teach. And in the unlikely scenario where they do have teaching opportunities, but they're not required, I would strongly recommend that you take at least 2 semesters of teaching.
Yeah, I would even go so far as to say beyond the institution, it could depend on the department.
Yeah.
So for example, I know for me, because my department had no undergrads, there were no undergrads to teach. But did I want to? You know, I can't answer that. I probably would have probably said no, but that was a different world. Now, I think it's almost a requirement, because teaching requires you to know the material so much better. So there's really no loss to it. The only possible downside is you may not want to make that time commitment, but it's a time commitment to create a skill set that has no downside. There's no downside of being able to not only understand how to teach it, but understand how students learn. So.
And also teaching assistantships, they also vary from institution to institution.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it might mean that you're just grading exams for the professor that you're working with. It could mean helping to actually teach the course, or maybe you'll run the seminar. So there are various levels of experience that you might get in. They call them TA-ships, teaching assistantships.
We were discussing earlier how to stay in contact with faculty, and you suggested, every 5 or 6 months, send them an email. And we were talking about that in the context of undergraduate faculty. How should we stay in contact, or how should the participants stay in contact with the faculty they're working with this summer?
The same way, just keep in contact with them periodically. The assumption will be that if you're seniors, applications become available mid-August. So you will be well into the application process very soon. If you're juniors or sophomores or even freshmen, if you're freshmen, I think, you don't necessarily, you can, but I think there'll be other research opportunities that'll be closer to your application process. But you should continue and start, if you haven't started, you should start networking and getting to know faculty. But if you're, close to leaving, if this is your last year, you would do it the same way.
Yeah. And if you're in an experimental science, then, and you received an offer from an institution, reach out to the faculty member, and who you might have worked with, to reach out to that faculty member and say, hey, I was supposed to have been in your research lab, but sadly, COVID changed everything. You know what? I just thought about something, and I would even ask, if possible, if the lab is having a group meeting, can you join virtually? There's no, even if you're just, you're not asking any questions, you get to learn. The worst a faculty member could say is no. But if they are having, so, they might be having them in person, but ask if they would mind if you could join the lab, virtually, so that you can see the environment and learn more about the research. So what you want to do is, to the extent that you can, create as many options as you can. But to get in contact with that faculty member, probably by email, and to stay in contact, because it might, if you're not a graduating senior, it could be possible that you'll have another opportunity to work with them next summer.
We have a question from a student who has a specific set of disciplines, but I'm going to ask you to answer as well from more general disciplines. So what is your advice for a student whose prior research experiences are focused on the environment or mortuary archaeology and public health, but's now interested in interdisciplinary environmental issues? So if you had a specific focus and now you want to go to interdisciplinary problem solving.
I think at the PhD level, that's more the norm. You know, I would certainly really think hard about, because again, you know, we don't expect you to come in with the thesis, but we do expect you to come in with an idea of what it is that you want to do. And so if you're going from something very narrow and then you want to broaden it, you know, think about what you want to do in the context of broadening it, right? So how does it make sense for you to bring in these other one or two fields in the context of your experience? You know, how does that all make sense in terms of where you see yourself moving forward?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. The thing is, whenever you're shifting fields, and again, I switched from chemistry, which is a basic science, to toxicology, which is much more interdisciplinary with biology, chemistry, physics, and a little engineering, is that you must be able to make the case of why it makes sense and how it makes sense. And more importantly, that you can make this switch. They have to know this. Remember, on these applications, if you don't tell us, we don't know. We don't know what your thinking is, but you share that with us.
Mm-hmm. And actually, so my bachelor's and master's, as was mentioned, they were both in aerospace engineering, but the PhD was actually in mechanical engineering. But it made sense because a lot of the foundational courses were very similar.
You were 16?
17.
That was 17? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're talking.
This year, due to COVID, a lot of schools are moving to pass-fail, or some schools are already pass-fail. How are admissions committees going to look at this, and how does it intersect with your GPA?
It's not going to impact it because all institutions, they're doing that. You know, they gave students the option. A lot of institutions gave students the option to do pass-fail. So they'll look at your records in their totality. It's not going to, you won't be penalized for something that's completely out of your control.
Yeah, and some institutions didn't give the option. So we know we're not trying to be Inspector Gadget, you know, did you have the option to do pass-fail and you took, we're trying to understand your potential, your potential to be a productive researcher in our PhD program. So that's the other thing, to keep in mind with these applications, we're not trying to come up with a reason to say no. The answer is already no because you're not in there. We're trying to come up with a reason to say yes. So the more information that you can provide, the easier it is for programs to come up with, easier for programs to say yes. But that's the thing that's really going to be in your hands with the crafting of your statement of purpose, the selection of your recommenders, how you make your CV look, how you explain your research. All of that, much of that is in your hands.
And the comment about 16 or 17 is the department number for your program. And it actually is 16 for aerospace at MIT. It was 16.
Okay, I thought you were course 16. Okay. I was like 17. Okay.
It's the last time we put you two on the same panel.
I know.
Just kidding.
Okay, full disclosure, we found out when we met, 2011 and 12, that we lived in the buildings that were almost next door to each other when she was an undergrad and I was a grad, but we didn't know each other.
Back to the subject at hand. How important is attending conferences as an experience? And if somebody had an abstract accepted for this cycle and it was canceled due to COVID, should you list that as well on your resume or CV?
You should list that your paper or talk was accepted, but due to COVID, the conference itself got canceled. So having that's one way to expand your resume or CV. And so those are important. You also get to be around like-minded individuals. It's a great way to start networking, and networking is going to be crucial for the rest of your lives, okay? You never know who you're going to run into once you get out of graduate school. Individuals that you're networking with at these conferences may end up being in positions to offer you faculty teaching positions. You just never know. So it's important, a large part of the conference, in addition to potentially presenting either a talk or a poster, is the whole networking environment. And you should really try to take advantage of both atmospheres. So I'm often asked, should I go to a conference if I have nothing to present? And the answer is yes, because you will have an opportunity to start networking and increasing your network of contacts. It's always great though if you do have a poster or something, or an oral presentation.
Yeah, conferences are that's a part of your scholarly development. Number one, presenting, but even important, that networking part. And even the networking is important because one of the things that you can find, particularly at your discipline specific or discipline related conferences, you don't know whose talk or whose poster you could visit that could add some additional thoughts on how to move your research further, faster. So that's part of this network. You see a paper or poster that's related to what you're working on, because sometimes you might find out, I'm far ahead of the competition, because you don't know what other people are doing until they publish it. But then sometimes you can see a poster that says, holy crap, I'm a little bit behind. And you could find out that someone's working on exactly the same thing you're doing in almost the same way, but you don't want them to scoop you. That is, to get the paper, to get the research finished and the paper published. So conferences are important in that way too. And anytime you've had a paper accepted or a poster, definitely list any research conference where you've had a presentation accepted. And the fact that things are going to be canceled because of COVID is because we're talking now, and we're supposed to attend some conferences and we don't even know whether they're going to happen.
What do admissions committees think about psychology majors who explored STEM and are applying to some graduate programs?
You said, what do they think about psychology majors who, I didn't hear the rest of it.
Who explored STEM research and are applying to a STEM graduate program?
It really depends on the courses that they took as an undergrad, because that could, and it really depends on what field they want to go into, right? There are engineering fields where you could have the psychology background, or areas of research where having the psychology background might make sense in the context of the research, but you'd have to really make the connection between having the undergrad psychology major and it could work maybe in like biomedical engineering, depending on what you want to do. So I would think I would need to have a little more context there as to what the person really wants to do. I'm happy to answer that offline if they want to email me.
Yeah, I would say, as we spoke about earlier, you have to tell how it makes sense. So if you're a psychology student and you're going into an engineering discipline, for example, you still need to have calculus 1, calculus 2, calculus 3, differential equations, linear algebra, etc. So if you're going in, because remember, as an engineering graduate student, you've still got your core courses that you have to pass. And if you don't have the background to register for those courses and pass them, there's no chance that you're going to get an offer. It doesn't make a difference what your research experience is. Keep in mind this, in our STEM disciplines, which are very experimental, being able to do experiments makes you a technician. Being an engineer or scientist, that's the thinking, that's the thought of it, and that thought is a function of your background. And your background consists of your academic coursework, which forms the foundation of your theoretical background to form and answer questions. The experiments just, confirmation that your thoughts are correct. And I'm gonna pick on Dr. Neron. So, she was an MIT undergrad, and I think your first actual lab course comes in your junior year with junior lab, right? The first 2 years are spent getting the theoretical background, and that's how graduate school is treated. It doesn't make a difference. You can be all thumbs. And dirty little secret, you probably see very few tenured faculty in their research lab. They don't do experiments anymore. But I promise you, the theoretical basis of everything, because they're writing the grants to talk about why this can be done. They don't do experiments anymore. They might be, as graduate students, I think, Michelle, you probably had this experience too. Oh my God, she's coming into the lab. Oh, don't touch anything, don't touch anything. But so think about your scholarship is a function of your scholarly development.
It's an engineering question. Would you recommend doing the engineering FE exam if planning to go into academia?
So it's not necessary. However, if it's the fundamentals of engineering exam. If you're thinking about doing anything that's maybe civil engineering related, anything related to construction where you would need the fundamentals of engineering, and then then there's the I believe it's the PE. I would recommend taking it. There's a lot of studying that goes into it. You don't have, if that's not your plan to get into actual building constructions, etc., you don't necessarily have to take it. I didn't take it. The thing there though, because I knew what I had an idea of what I wanted to do. It can't hurt to take it, and the sooner you take it, after taking it, because it's based on a lot of what you're learning as an undergrad, and like anything else, if you're not in that environment, if you wait 2 or 3 years to take it, it's going to take you a lot more time to get up to speed in order to take the exam. A lot of students who do take it typically take it immediately after or while they're still finishing up their undergrad studies.
Does it look bad to those in industry or academia if you get your graduate degree from the same school that you obtained your undergraduate degree?
No, not at all. You want to answer that one?
No. However, there's some institutions that have this philosophy. We want our undergraduates to go someplace else to do it. Listen, regardless of what institution you go to, if I go into a specific class, it's going to be the same. No, it isn't. It's just some old school traditional philosophy that really doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's just people's personal preferences for whatever. And some people might even have that philosophy and don't even know why. I think go someplace else if you did your bachelor's degree. That's just my personal opinion. Dr. Neron.
No, I agree. It doesn't really matter. I mean, there may be benefits to doing your bachelor's in one institution, maybe doing the PhD at another, in the context of you're learning a completely new environment. But if you do your bachelor's degree in one institution and it makes sense for you to stay there, you have a faculty member who will guide you, will be a great mentor. You have a research project that you may have started as an undergraduate. It may make complete sense to stay at that same institution. And I see both scenarios, and neither one is looked upon negatively.
Yeah, we even have nicknames for them at Vanderbilt. So if you do 1 degree here, you're called a Commodore. If you do 2 degrees here, you're called a double door. And if you do 3 degrees here, you're called a triple door. We're creative.
Wait, was the second the Dumbledore or Double?
Double.
Oh.
Double.
Dumbledore would be really cool.
Commodore, double door, and triple door.
So we have just 3 questions left, but they're all from the same student. So I'm going to post them all together, and then we'll wrap up. So the first question is, what would you recommend for a student who wants to study something related to space in order to become an astronaut? Their next question is, how do you make your application stand out? Certainly going to space would help. And then last, how do you increase your research opportunities when you don't have any at a baseline?
Okay, I'm going to start the questions in a backwards order. So to increase your research experiences, you want to try to either get involved in summer research experiences. It really depends on what year you're in, and or internships to broaden your research portfolio. If you want to if you want to become an astronaut, I would suggest looking into institutions that have either aerospace engineering. You probably want to at least look into that type of a field as opposed to mechanical engineering. And then, you should really try, in terms of internships, try to get an internship at places like NASA. They have a lot of summer research opportunities. They also have internship opportunities. So you might want to look at what's happening at NASA and that would be my primary advice for that. And did I get the second question?
Can I take the second one?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
The second question, how do you make your application stand out?
Yes.
Answer the questions the way they were asked. Some other things you can do to make your application stand out in a positive way. Again, don't use humor. You don't know whether the folks reading it are different ethnicity, different age group, etc. Number 2 is don't make them play Where's Waldo. Tell us what your research interests are. Why, if we are trying to figure out what you want to do, why you want to do it, what you want to think afterwards, don't make us search all over the place. And I say us as in folks who read applications. So the simpler you make your application, the more it stands out, because they remember, gosh, this was really good. Because I know, Dr. Neron, you've probably seen those applications. When I was 6 years old, I've always, the eyes roll, tongues and mouths start to dry out, heads fall down, because it's when you just tell us, I intend to earn a PhD in mechanical engineering, or I intend to earn a PhD in aerospace engineering as a first step to becoming a NASA astronaut. Boom! They know what the rest of this statement is going to be about. But from the time I was 6 years old, I was at Cocoa Beach, and I don't know where you're going to go. Where is this leading? So capture their interest, keep it by making sure that this statement is written to folks in your discipline, but not necessarily in your sub-discipline, conversational, no humor, and keep it short and succinct. Don't take 8 words to say what you can say in 2.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing. Yeah, on your resume, only focus on your last 4 years. We just want to see what you've been doing as an undergrad. You don't have to go back to high school.
Well, this has been wonderful. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today. A big round of applause to our 2 panelists. I know everybody's applauding at home, at least I hope so. If they're not, they should be. And you definitely deserve it. And if there are any other questions that any of the students have out there, you can email me, william_whittles@brown.edu. I'll make sure it gets to Dr. Neron or Dr. Brunson, or you can email them directly, whatever you want to do. So any closing remarks?
No, just, I'm ecstatic that you participated in this session today. I know 2 hours is a lot of time, and we appreciate you for doing that, and we hope to help you get to where you want to be in the near future. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us for this webinar, and we hope that you have a safe and wonderful holiday. And we look forward to your applications in the fall.
Thanks, and Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.